New U.S. travel regulations set to go in effect in less than 10 days. And there's a question that I've seen a lot out there. Once I get vaccinated, I'm good, right? I don't have to worry about all this other stuff, testing, health protocols. Not exactly. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the Cruise News Show. I'm your host, Tony, here with the latest updates. Well, today we're going to talk about new U.S. travel restrictions going into place on January the 26th. And this travel restriction is pointed directly at the airlines. So for all you cruisers out there that are often bemoaning the fact that it seems like there's a lot of restriction on cruising, but not very much on airlines, well, there you go. We got some restrictions to celebrate. This is a testing requirement for people entering the U.S. from a foreign land, from a foreign departure point. If you're going to travel outside the U.S. into the United States, before you can even board your plane at the place that you're leaving, you have to provide a negative COVID test that had been taken within the last 3 days before your departure date. And this has to be a viral COVID test, a viral negative COVID test. The goal here is to stop the COVID from coming into the United States. So a couple of scenarios: you could be an international traveler, you could be a citizen of another country coming to the United States. You have to get tested prior to, or you could be somebody from the US who maybe went on vacation to a country that you're allowed to travel into, Mexico, for example. And now before you can return from Mexico to the United States by airplane, you now have to provide a COVID test. Extrapolating the example even further, you fly to Cancun for an all-inclusive resort. You're going for a 7-day stay. Well, before you can return to wherever you flew from in the United States, somewhere along that 7-day stay, you have to get a COVID test to present to the airline for your return flight. This applies to travelers 2 years old and older. So if you are under 2, good news for you today, you have an exemption to this travel restriction. Now, there is an exception to these new restrictions, and that's for people that have already had the virus. If you've already had the virus, you still have to provide documentation. You have to prove that you have recovered from the virus, probably with your last COVID test or some sort of antibody test to show that you have recovered from COVID-19. You can submit that. Also, the gatekeeper on the documentation, the airlines themselves, the CDC pushing into the airline saying, you're in charge. You have to check and make sure that everybody has this documentation, has these negative tests before you allow them to travel. And quickly, before we get much deeper into this conversation, if you like staying up to date on everything that's going on in that cruise life, please consider subscribing with the notification bell on. That way you don't miss out on any of these episodes. Thanks in advance. Now, I did poke around a little bit on the American Airlines website, and there was a question there about vaccine, and I do believe that's a question that a lot of people have, not only for air travel, but for cruise travel. If I have been vaccinated, if I have proof of vaccine, am I still going to have to jump through these hoops? Am I still going to have to get a COVID test before I go flying, for example? And at this point, we don't really know what the rules are going to be for cruising out of the United States. But if we look at where cruising has happened in 2020, there has been a testing requirement. So this is going to be an interesting question for people who have been vaccinated. Will you have to do this testing on an airplane? Will you have to do potentially this testing on a cruise ship? Well, the answer to this question, at least for right now, at least from American Airlines perspective, is yes. They are unconcerned with your vaccination status. Every passenger has to produce this negative test if they're coming in from a foreign port. So they don't really care if you've been vaccinated. Now, maybe that will change as time goes on, as more and more people get vaccinated. I think they're going to have to deal with it. And with cruise, it gets even more complex. You know, these new travel regulations that the U.S. is putting in place over airline entry into the United States from a foreign port. Think about that from a cruise perspective. You may go to multiple foreign countries on a single cruise, and so there'll be a requirement to get back into the United States. That's what we're talking about now. But what about all those countries that you entered? They may have their own policy on what you need to get into their country. Do you need a test? Do you need a vaccine? So this is going to be complex going forward for the cruiser. I would say even differently than what it will be for just the airline traveler. And again, this is international international travel. It doesn't even talk about state-to-state airline travel. So there's no testing requirement to fly from one U.S. state to another state. But certainly if you can bring the COVID from a foreign country into the United States, you could move it around the country also. I think a lot of us are looking for a one thing to get it done. If I just get the vaccination, I can travel. If I just take a test, can I travel? If I just do the health protocols, can I travel? Well, what we're noticing is we're seeing these new restrictions coming in, and we talked about it before. The whole point of like the health protocols was a layered approach to safety, right? We know that tests aren't 100% accurate. We know that social distancing isn't always perfect, and so to give the best chance for mitigation against the spread of the virus, you layer protocols on top of each other. You do multiple things, and so I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet at the end of the day. I don't think there's going to be an end all be all. And the reality, at least for me, is as long as we're in a scenario where you see significant amount of infections happening, where we don't see a steady decline of infections, I think there's going to be as many things layered on top of each other as possible just to drive that number down. Now, once that number is driven down by a widely vaccinated population, I think maybe you'll see an unlayering of the protocols, and at the end of the day, vaccine may be the silver bullet. But I would say for the next 6 months, possibly the next year, I don't think anything's coming off the table. I think you might get vaccinated, you still have to be tested, and of course you're going to have to wear a mask. So I think that is our reality for right now. Another interesting nugget from the American Airlines website, the question is out there in their FAQ, are you providing testing, American Airlines? They are not. Now, there will be testing centers for sure at airports. Wherever there is an opportunity, opportunistic people usually step in. That's already happening. But like everything else at the airport, like a ham sandwich at the airport, it's going to cost you more. So if you're traveling, please be aware of this restriction so that you get your test before you go to the airport, or you're going to be paying airport ham sandwich prices. I hope you know what I mean. It's going to be more expensive. That's what I'm saying. And that could be a big difference. The cruise lines may get into the testing business. That's what we've seen in Europe. That's what we've seen in Asia. They're providing the test at the point of embarkation. If that becomes too onerous, too expensive, the cruise lines may even get out of that testing business. But the great thing about the cruise lines doing testing at the point of embarkation is you know for sure that it happened right there. That may be one of the reasons, but it'll be interesting to see when cruising starts again if coming to the cruise port with proof of a test is part of your package. And the thing that's troubling to me is, like, why is it taking us so long to get to this point of restriction for the airlines? I mean, of course, there was a travel ban in the beginning, but when testing became readily available, why weren't we stopping people and asking for tests at the airport then? Why now? I mean, there's certainly arguments to be had, arguments that will continue to certainly play out. I mean, the cat's kind of out of the bag. We're so far into this process. You know, the base argument is be as super restrictive as possible for the shortest period of possible to make the infection rate go down. That's always been one argument, but we may be too far gone for that, right? Like, there's challenges economically, there's challenges mental health wise. I'm pointing at myself. I think we're well beyond this idea that we can be super restrictive, and we got to find another way. And I think that's what you see playing out. Now we're just overlaying restrictions to see if they move the needle. But that continues to be the debate, right? How much restriction will be effective without being destructive? Maybe we would have been better served being this strict some time ago. This seems very reactionary, but it is what it is. We got to get through it. We've got to keep adjusting. We got to keep making things happen to try to stop the spread. I just looked, it is trending down from about a week ago, so that's good. Now, my question is this: we've seen a lot of people eyeballing all-inclusives in Mexico and in other places that do have a flight component on it. This is going to change the dynamic for that. Were you eyeing an all-inclusive? What do you think about this rule in general? And what about this? It's taken us 11 months to get to this place, and that feels like a long time. Maybe it's not in the scheme of things, but it feels like a long time. how long does it take us to get from the valley that we're in back to level ground? Do you think that the ascent back to normalcy will take as long as the descent to not normalcy? Is something going to move the needle so drastically that quickly life will get back to normal, or do you think we're in for a longer haul? And if so, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching the show today. Please show your support by hitting the like button. This is Tony with Lido Loca, and until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.